Hi, beautiful friends. I'm Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast infused with love from your angels and designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions and soul mentoring and a variety of classes. And when you wake up in the morning, you can learn more about that at my website, illuminatingSouls.com, where you can also sign up for my daily inspiration email blast. So lots of very sweet ways for us to connect outside of this podcast. But right now, I am here for you. The angels and I are cultivating a sweet and sacred sanctuary where you can let go of whatever came before this moment and come into a wellspring of gentle, soothing, loving energy that is here to support you. If you've been listening to the podcast, then you know I have a lot of compassion for all that the world is moving through right now. And this can show up for you in a lot of different ways. It may be that your personal curriculum, meaning the experiences you are having, the challenges that come knocking on your door, are taking a lot for you to navigate. And yet, even if things are moving smoothly for you, it is still entirely possible that as an empath, someone who feels energy or feels deeply in your heart, that you are also sensing the disturbance in the Force, as they say in Star Wars. Wherever you are on that continuum, whether it's your personal material that you are navigating, or if you're feeling what is transpiring in the collective, we are here for you. So just breathe. It's always so interesting for me as a channel, Josephus and the angels, that's a group of angelic guides that I channel. When they bring their energy to me for channeling, when I'm teaching a class or doing an angel session, one of the first things they always say is, breathe. And it's not that we don't breathe. Clearly, if you are alive and listening to this message, you're breathing. But what happens is we move into a shallow breath, just the autonomous nervous system, the just regular pedestrian everyday breath. And there is something powerful about taking a deep, intentional breath in and filling your lungs and releasing that begins to calm the body. And this is why we always invite you to breathe. When you breathe in, the breath of God. And when you breathe out, just breathe out anything you no longer need. And on the next breath, you can breathe in the love of God. And breathe out anything that is not love. And just allow your breath to grow deeper. Allowing your body to let go as you cozy on up and snuggle on into your bed. As I've shared with you before, I love getting to crawl in bed. The weather is cooler right now in Northern California, and so I'm fortunate in that my husband and I both like to sleep cold. I think it's probably much harder if you and your partner have different sleep temperatures, but my husband and I both like it really cold when we sleep. And so that lets me pile on more and more blankets. And it is my favorite time of year to sleep because I get to cozy on up with lots of blankets. And the bed starts to feel like a sanctuary, like a cocoon. And I think the places where we can sleep when we're lucky, it feels like a sanctuary, right? We get to tuck ourselves in at the end of a day, and our bodies can let go, and our minds can too, hopefully, right? If the mind isn't running around with everything that it needed to do, which is one of the reasons I do this podcast. So there will be a loving and soothing and rambling voice to keep you company as you drift off. And so the angels are here already. The love is streaming in for you. And I'm going to do an invocation just so we clearly invite them in and you know that they are here. And just so you know, you have angels. We all do. They are divine celestial beings that are here to love you. And all you need to do is receive. You don't have to perform 25 acts of charity or, certainly if you want to do that, that is always welcome in this world. But this is not a love you have to earn. This is a love that exists because you exist. So just one more breath in and out, and certainly keep breathing after this. And I'm going to call in the angels. And beautiful beloved angels on high, we invite you to join us here. And I ask that you cultivate a beautiful, rich, deep, sacred space that is in alignment with helping to bring forth a good night's sleep. Angels, we ask that you clear our energy fields through the heart of God, helping to clear away anything that no longer serves and anything that does not belong to us. Angels, we ask that you lift our burdens and our worries into the heavens, where they can be transformed into light in service to the highest good. Angels, we ask that you bring healing to our bodies, our minds, and our spirits, knowing that healing is divine in nature, and we don't even need to know what is up for healing right now. because God knows. And as we come into this sanctuary of light, we are met with waves and waves of divine healing. And angels, I ask that you imbue this energy field with light so that everyone who hears this message receives special blessings that have been cultivated just for them. Please help everyone who hears this message to know that they are loved and that they are a blessing here on earth. And beautiful friends, you just breathe and let the angels do the heavy lifting. If you have prayers and intentions that you would like to share with God and the angels now, just whisper them in your heart. It can be in the silence, and yet your prayers and intentions will be heard loudly in the universe. And they will be amplified by the divine heart of God. One of the things I love so much about this connection with the angels is that the angels really know who you are. There's a really beautiful song written by the singer-songwriter David Wilcox that I love. It's a very short and sweet song, and it's called Burgundy Heart-Shaped Medallion. And here are the lyrics. If I had a spell of magic, I would make this enchantment for you. A burgundy heart-shaped medallion with a window that you could look through, so that when all the mirrors are angry with your faults and all you must do, you can peek through that heart-shaped medallion and see you from my point of view. And I used to listen to that song and I would cry, and I longed for that heart-shaped medallion because at the time all of my mirrors were angry. And I think that happens in this life, yes? The voices in our head and the voices in the mirrors, they sometimes are unkind. So my wish for you tonight is that you can open up and the angels will help you with this, so you can see yourself through the eyes of your angels, through the heart of God, and know that you are a blessing here on earth, that you are worthy of great love, and that this world is better because you are here, and that your life matters. And I'll put a link to the David Wilcox song in the show notes, so if you want in the morning you can listen to it. It's so beautiful. And I wish you this gift. You know, one of the huge gifts of the work that I do is I get to see the wholeness of you. I get to see who you really are as a divine being in human form. You are exquisite. You carry such love inside of you. And it is such a blessing to get to be here with you in this moment and love on you and help you remember who you are. Having this human experience where we go through the portal of amnesia as we are born and forget who we are, and we spend a lifetime trying to remember. So this is one of those moments where I help you remember. This is one of those moments where you begin to feel and know that there is something so special and so wonderful about you. And that as you get ready to rest, as you sleep, the angels are going to bring to you blessings of love to help you remember the brightness of your spirit. I like to think that the dreams you are asking of God are often the dreams God is asking of you. So you rest and know that you are being watched over and you are being cared for and you have permission to rest. You did good today and we are grateful for you. And while you rest, I'm going to read to you. Tonight, I'm going to read to you something a little different. And it's something that I'm hoping will inspire your heart. The title of it is The Story of a Literary Career by Ella Wheeler Wilcox. Now, hers is likely a name you haven't heard of before, but if you are in the U.S. and you are alive at the end of the 1800s, you likely would have known her. She was a very popular writer and poet. I actually discovered her as I was searching through public domain material for this podcast, and I was looking up New Thought Wisdom and came across some of her writing. So she also wrote about New Thought Wisdom at the time. And what's so interesting about her autobiography is ever since she was a child, she was a writer. And sometimes that's true. And I think quite often there are gifts that we have embodied since childhood that can sometimes go dormant as we get older, and sometimes not. So this doesn't mean you had to be a writer since you were young. But I read this to you because I'm hoping it will help you remember some of the innate magic that dwelled within you when you were a child and is still with you now. And you don't have to stay awake and listen. You have permission to drift off. And just know you're in an intentional energy field that is cultivated with love for you. So this is Ella Wheeler Wilcox's book, interestingly enough, published by Elizabeth Town. And if you remember, we read from Elizabeth Town's Nautilus magazine a couple of episodes ago, and this was published in 1905. So Elizabeth Town writes the foreword. In almost every hamlet and village in America, one or more literary clubs exist. The study of living authors is a part of their curriculum. Ella Wheeler Wilcox, like all well-known American authors, receives innumerable requests from the secretaries of literary societies for information concerning her life, methods, and work. During a recent visit at her home, the tax upon her time, clippings, and patience by such requests was observable, and a suggestion was made to her that the material desired by literary clubs be supplied in book form. This suggestion resulted in the present little booklet, which the publisher takes pleasure in presenting to the public. My autobiography. Someone asked me not long ago when it was that I first conceived the idea of a literary profession, and at what age I first found myself something of a celebrity. I do not remember when I did not expect to be a writer, and I was a neighborhood celebrity at the age of 8. The youngest of my mother's children, I seem to have had my career arranged for me by the conditions before my birth. It has always been my belief that children inherit the suppressed tendencies of their parents. A clergyman's son frequently shows abnormal tastes for the pleasures that his father denied himself, and talent is quite often the full-blown flower of a little shoot which circumstances has crushed under its heel in a former generation. So at the age of 8, I began to compose prose and rhyme because the literary tendencies of my mother had never been gratified. The poetical gift was no doubt greatly the result of her having accidental access to a library of the poets for the first time in her life, the year previous to my advent, and the happiest and most hopeful year of her life. Until I reached the age of 14, the neighborhood and the school satisfied me as an audience. I hailed Composition Day with an eagerness equaled only by my terror of an examination in mathematics. It is human to love to shine, and equally human to dislike being humiliated in our fellow beings' eyes. One of the most depressing days in my life was when I stood 20 in a scale of 100 in mathematics. My early literary outlook was not one which would encourage most aspirants. My family had left a comfortable, even a luxurious home for those days in Vermont to seek fortune in the New West, Wisconsin, before the year of my birth. My father had been a music teacher all his life, and when he attempted to become a businessman and speculator, he made a failure of it. By the time I was a year or 2 old, he had lost the little competence he brought west with him, and the family, 2 parents and 4 children, including myself, was obliged to begin life anew at the foot of the ladder upon a western prairie, 12 miles distant from the nearest town. This town was Madison, Wisconsin's capital. I had no literary advisors or coaches. My parents were intellectual. My mother was a great reader of whatever came in her way, and was possessed of a wonderful memory. The elder children were excellent scholars, and a grammatical error was treated as a cardinal sin in the household. But no one knew anything about the methods of getting into print, and we had no literary associates. We were, in truth, while poor in worldly goods and knowledge and customs, the solitary intellectual aristocrats of the locality. We had a few books, and only a weekly newspaper. In an old red chest upstairs were religiously preserved copies of the Arabian Nights, Gulliver's Travels, John Gilpin's Ride, and a few of Shakespeare's plays. The New York Ledger and the New York Mercury were sent to us by relatives for several years, and the first literary feasts I indulged in were the weekly serial stories of Mrs. Southworth and May Agnes Fleming. They were like Tabasco sauce to the appetite, exciting but not healthful. They gave me false ideas of life and added to my discontent with my lonely environment. There was nothing in my situation to cultivate poetical talent, and I no doubt owe my early development as a poet to the fact, paradoxical as the statement may seem. Born with intense cravings for pleasure, I should have been the veriest amusement seeker in my youth, had not necessity stood at my elbow. Whatever genuine talent we possess must reveal itself in time, But my early start in my profession was due to my desire to change and enlarge my horizon and better the conditions of the home where no one was contented. At the age of 9, I completed a novel of 11 chapters headed with original rhymes. I still have it, bound in paper, which I took from a loose panel on the kitchen wall. It was soon after this period that I saw my first editor. He came from Madison with a railroad official to ask for subscriptions for some proposed new line of railroad. He came in a covered carriage, my idea of elegance and wealth, and as I rarely saw anything better than lumber wagons or runabouts. I came from school, a long-mile walk, on a hot summer afternoon, tired and curious to know who was within. As I entered the room, some member of the family presented me, and the editor took me on his knee. "You look as delicate as a city girl," he said. "You ought to be more robust living in this fine country air." Editors have said many kind things of me since then, but nothing which ever gave me such a sense of being a superior being as that. To look like a city girl, what joy! Yet I had never seen a city girl then, I am sure. During my 13th year, the New York Mercury ceased to come to us. I missed its weekly visits with an intensity scarcely to be understood by one who has not known the same lonely surroundings and possessed the same temperament. There was not money enough floating around in those times to permit a subscription to the Mercury, and if I were to possess it, I knew I must either obtain a long list of subscribers, which would be a difficult and laborious undertaking, or earn it by my pen. I resolved to try, but fearing failure, I did not want the family to know of my venture. I wrote 2 essays. Just what the subjects were I have forgotten, and the clippings were lost years since. How to post my letter was the next question. I often acted as a mail carrier to the post office 5 miles distant, riding across fields and over fences on my graceful single-footer Kitty, in company with a schoolmate, Alice Ellis, who possessed a Shetland pony. We rode without saddles, blanketing and bridling our own steeds, and it is fortunate I did not live in Buffalo Bill's vicinity, or my career might have terminated in the Wild West show. While I could post a letter unknown to my family, the stamp had first to be obtained. Finally, I decided on a strategy. I was corresponding with a young girl several years my senior, who was in the freshman class at Madison University. I confided in her, enclosed the Mercury letter, and assured her she would be reimbursed for the stamp when we next met. I would save my pennies for the purpose. Jean posted my letter and watched the newsstand for results. 2 months later, long after I had relinquished all hope, she wrote me that my essays had appeared, whereupon I wrote a stern reproof to the editor for not sending me the paper, at least, as pay for my work, if he could afford no other remuneration. Shortly afterward, a large package of back numbers of the New York Mercury came addressed to me through the country post office. Even at that immature period, I had a wooer, a young man past voting age, possessed of a mustache, a tenor voice, and no visible means of support. He played the violin and sang "This Night or Never, My Bride Thou Shalt Be" in a truly fascinating manner. He had been given to understand by the family that his room was preferable to his company, however, and had ceased to call. When the enormous roll of newspapers direct from the editor's office came to me, a stern senior member of the household at once concluded that the lovelorn swain had subscribed to win a new favor in my eyes. This accusation was made before I was questioned on the subject. Perhaps the most triumphant and dramatic hour of my life was when I stepped forth in short skirts and long ringlets and announced to the family that not my would-be lover, but my literary work had procured the coveted Mercury for our united enjoyment. The world seemed to grow larger and life more wonderful from that hour. I was then 14. I wrote to Jean and asked her to send me a list of all the weeklies and monthlies she could find on the bookstands, and to each and every one I sent essays, stories, and poems with enthusiasm and persistency. Every penny was saved for postage, and the family entered into my ambitions with encouraging faith in my success. I soon filled the house with all the periodicals we had time to read, and in addition the editors sent me books and pictures and bric-a-brac and the tableware, articles from their prize lists, which were more precious than gems would have been to me. They served to relieve the bare and commonplace aspect of the home, and the happiness I felt in earning these things with my pen is beyond words to describe. It is a curious incident that the first bit of silverware which came into the home was manufactured by the house with which the man whose name I am fortunate in bearing today was afterward associated. The very first verses I sent for publication were unmercifully ridiculed by my beloved Mercury. The editor urged me to keep to prose and to avoid any further attempts to rhyme. He said that while this criticism would wound me temporarily, it would eventually confer a favor on me and the world at large. I recall only 2 stanzas of that unfortunate poem. It related to the woes of a lovelorn maiden, and I described her as, quote, "She flew to her room, locked and bolted the door, and in anguish and grief threw herself on the floor." This is precisely what I did when I read the editor's cruel comment. Yet, after the first despair wore off, I set to work with a new fervor and determination, and sent poems and essays and stories to the Saturday Evening Post, Demarists, Peterson's, and Arthur's magazines, Harper's, Leslie's, and a score more of periodicals. My first published poem appeared in the Waverley magazine. About the time I appeared in print, I left the country school. My record there had been wretched in mathematics, while excellent in grammar, spelling, and reading. I lost interest in study, and my mind would not focus itself upon school books. I lived in a world of imagination, and pictured for myself a wonderful future. In this I was encouraged at home by the ambitions of my mother, who despised her life, and felt herself and her family superior to all her associates, and was forever assuring me, and them as well, that my future would be wholly apart from my early companions. Fortunately for me, and for all concerned, I was a healthy and normal young animal, and fond of my comrades and enjoying their sports, into which I entered with zest, despite my mental aspirations and literary tendencies. I was passionately fond of dancing, and at 15 attended the merrymakings of the grown-up girls and young men of the neighborhood, looking with disdain upon a boy of my own age. An elder brother and sister felt concerned at my lack of education and my propensity for pleasure, and the family made great sacrifices and managed to send me off to Madison University at about this time. I was not at all happy there. First, because I knew the strain it put upon the home purse. Second, because I felt the gulf between myself and the town girls, whose gowns and privileges revealed to me, for the first time, the different classes in American social life. And third, because I wanted to write and did not want to study, I had lost all taste for school books. On composition day, I undertook to distinguish myself by writing a narrative as the class was requested, but my ardent love story only called forth a kind rebuke from gentle Miss Ware, and I was told to avoid reading the New York Ledger. After one term, I begged my mother to allow me to remain at home and write, and she wisely consented. I took to my profession with a new ardor and enthusiasm after that. My first check came from Frank Leslie's publishing house. I wrote asking for one of his periodicals to be sent to me in return for 3 little poems I had composed in one day. In reply came a check for $10, saying I must select which one of some 13 publications they issued at that time. This bit of crisp paper opened a perfect floodgate of aspiration, inspiration, and ambition for me. I had not thought of earning money so soon. I had expected to obtain only books, magazines, and articles of use and beauty from the editor's prize lists, and I had not supposed verses to be saleable. I wrote them because they came to me, but I expected to be a novelist like Mrs. Southworth and May Agnes Fleming in time. That was the goal of my dreams. The check from Leslie was a revelation. I walked, talked, thought, and dreamed in verse after that. A day which passed without a poem from my pen I considered lost and misused. 2 each day was my idea of industry, and I once achieved 8. They sold, the majority, for $3 or $5 each. Sometimes I got $10 for a poem. That was always an event. Short love stories over which I labored painfully as story writing was an acquired habit, also added to my income, bringing me $10 or $15, and once in a while larger sums from Peterson's, Demarest's, Harper's Bazaar, and the Chimney Corner. Everything in life was material for me, my own emotions, the remarks or experiences of my comrades and associates, sentences from books I read in some phases of nature. At a Thanksgiving Eve ball, I recollect waltzing with a very good-looking young man whom I met there for the first time. The band played one of Strauss's waltzes as we floated about the hall. I thought to myself, if I were desperately in love with this man and he cared for someone else, this waltz would sound like a dirge to me. So the next day I wrote a little poem called The Dirge, which paid for my slippers and was widely copied. The waltz quadrille was one of my most popular early verses, was similarly conceived. I had promised the quadrille at a commencement ball at Madison University to a man on the eve of a journey who was unable to find me when the number was called. Although I did not have the pleasure of a dance with him, I wrote the poem and sent him a copy of it, saying, "This is the way I should have felt had I been in love with you, and had I danced the waltz quadrille with you just before your departure from Madison." The editors seemed to want these heart wails, and once returned a historical poem I ventured to write, saying, "Send us little heartache verses. Those are what our readers like." A new line of railroad came through the county, and we had 3 mails a week and a post office only 3 miles away. My good single pacer was sold, but my father had taken an old horse, Bernie, in trade, and my brothers had purchased a light-top buggy. I used to write my daily stint of several poems and perhaps a story, and with a half a dozen manuscripts addressed to as many editors, I would harness old Bernie and drive to the post office with my brainwares, and great was the day when I brought home a check. Harper paid me $15 for one poem. Leslie sent me a check of $40 for 10 poems and a short story. The Saturday Evening Post sent me a set of Dickens, all within a period of 6 months after my first money success. It seemed wonderful to me and to the family and to the neighbors. Until I began to earn money, the neighbors had criticized my mother for keeping me out of the kitchen and allowing me to scribble so much. But when they found me able, with one day's work at my desk, to hire an assistant in the house for a month, they began to respect my talent. I often wish the scores of grown men and women who write to me for aid and influence in getting into print could know just how I found my way into the favor of editors. It was by sheer persistence. It never occurred to me to ask advice or assistance of strangers. I am glad it did not, for the moment we lean upon any one but the divine power and the divinity within us, we lessen our chances of success. I often receive letters now from writers in the West asking me to use my influence with editors in their behalf and saying, "You must realize from your own early struggles how impossible it is to get a start in an Eastern periodical without a friend at court." No more absurd idea ever existed. Eastern editors are on the lookout for new talent constantly, and if a writer possesses it, together with persistence, he will succeed whether he lives in the Western desert or in the metropolis and without any friend at court. I frequently sent out 10 manuscripts in one post to have 9 come back with drooping heads, but I sent them forth on another voyage by the next mail. I kept a series of crude books with a list of the periodicals and the travels of each poem or story inscribed therein. Many a manuscript took 9 or 10 journeys to New York and Boston before it found acceptance. One story, declined by 9 editors and ridiculed by the 9th on the margin, brought $75 from the 10th, the largest price I had ever received. My world grew larger with each sunrise, it seemed to me. People from Madison, Milwaukee, and Chicago began to write me and seek me out. I was invited to visit city homes, and while this was a delight bordering on ecstasy and a relief from the depressing atmosphere of home anxieties, it yet brought with it consciousness of the world's demands, which added to those of duty and necessity, made a larger income imperative. A Milwaukee editor offered me $45 a month to edit the literary department of a trade magazine. I accepted, but the office hours and order of work were wholly distasteful to me. I was not sorry when the venture failed at the expiration of 3 months. It was the only experience of my life in attempting an office position. Much of the earliest work of my pen was devoted to poems on total abstinence, a subject on which the family was very enthusiastic. These verses, some 50 in number, were issued in book form during my teens under the title of Drops of Water. I received $50 for the copyright, and am sure Mr. Rockefeller feels no richer today with his millions than I did with my book and check. Scarcely a year later, I published, by subscription, my first miscellaneous collection, Shells, now out of print. Then I grew ambitious to write a story in verse, and devoted the best part of a summer to composing Maureen. Even the name was my own creation, suggested to me by a short poem of Nora Perry's entitled Noreen. When my book was completed, I made a visit to Chicago and called upon Jansen and McClurg, expecting that staid firm to eagerly seize upon my preferred manuscript, which I thought was to bring me worldwide fame and fortune. Instead, it was declined with thanks, and I was informed that they had never heard of me. After repeated efforts and failures, I induced a Wisconsin firm to get the book out. It barely paid expenses. But 2 years later, I was made happy by having Jansen and McClurg write and request the privilege of republishing the volume with additional short poems. Much of my earlier work was tinctured with melancholy, both real and imaginary. Young poets almost invariably write of sorrow. Naturally, of a happy disposition, I had my moods of depression, veritable luxuries of misery. There was continual worry at home. No one was resigned or philosophical. My mother hated her hard-working lot, for which she was totally unfitted, and constantly rebelled against it like a caged animal beating against iron bars, while she did her distasteful tasks with a Spartan-like adherence to duty, doubting the dominance of an all-wise ruler who could condemn her to such a lot. Like thousands of others in the world, she had not learned that through love and faith only do conditions change for the better. The home was pervaded by an atmosphere of discontent and fatigue and irritability. From reincarnated sources and through prenatal causes, I was born with unquenchable hope and unfaltering faith in God and guardian spirits. I often wept myself to sleep after a day of disappointments and worries, but woke in the morning singing aloud with the joy of life. I always expected wonderful things to happen to me. In some of the hardest days when everything went wrong, with everybody at home and all my manuscripts came back for 6 weeks at a time without one acceptance, I recall looking out of my little north window upon the lonely road bordered with lonelier Lombardy poplars and thinking, before night, something beautiful will happen to change everything. There was so much I wanted. I wanted to bestow comfort, ease, and pleasure on everybody at home. I wanted lovely gowns, oh, how I wanted them, and travel and accomplishments. I wanted summers by the sea which I had read of but never seen. And on moonlight nights these longings grew so aggressive, I often pinned the curtains down and shut out the rays that seemed to intensify my loneliness, and I would creep into my little couch under the sloping eaves, musing, another beautiful night of youth wasted and lost. And I would awaken happy in spite of myself, and put all my previous melancholy into verses and dollars. Once I read a sentence which became a life motto to me. If you haven't what you like, try to like what you have. I bless the author of that phrase. It was such a help to me just as I was nearing the borders of the family pessimism and chronic discontent. I tried from that hour to find something I liked and enjoyed in each day, something I could be thankful for, and I found much, though troubles increased and conditions did not improve about me. The elder children married and had cares of their own. I was so sorry for them, missing the beautiful things I knew life held. Slowly, so slowly it seemed to me, my work and my income increased. I longed for sudden success, for sudden wealth. It was so hard to wait. There was so much to be done. There was a gentle hill south of the house. Often on summer evenings, after writing all day, I climbed this ascent at sunset and looked eastward, wondering what lay for me beyond the horizon. I always had the idea that my future would be associated with the far west, yet it was to the east I invariably looked. My knowledge of the east was bounded by Milwaukee and Chicago, the goal of happy visits 2 or 3 times a year. Sometimes I walked through the pasture and young woods a half a mile to call on Emma, the one friend who knew and sympathized with all the family troubles. And Emma would walk back with me, and we would wonder how many years longer these walks and talks would continue for us. I would tell her of my successes in my work, and she and her gentle mother rejoiced in them as if they were their own personal triumphs. Such restful walks and talks they always were, dear Emma. When publishing Maureen, I had purposefully omitted more than 20 poems of a very romantic nature in order to save the volume from too much sentiment. Letters began to come to me requesting copies of these verses, ardent love songs, which had appeared in various periodicals. This suggested to me the idea of issuing a book of love poems to be called Poems of Passion. To think was to do, for I possessed more activity than caution in those days, and just related, every poem in the book had been published in various periodicals and had brought forth no criticism. My amazement can hardly be imagined, therefore, when Jansen and McClurg returned to the manuscript of my volume, intimating that it was immoral. I told the contents of their letter to friends in Milwaukee, and it reached the ears of a sensational morning newspaper. The next day, a column article appeared with large headlines. Too loud for Chicago. The Scarlet City by the Lake shocked by a Badger girl whose verses out-Swinburned Swinburne and out-Whitmaned Whitman. Every newspaper in the land caught up the story, and I found myself an object of unpleasant notoriety in a brief space of time. I had always been a local celebrity, but this was quite another experience. Some friends who had admired and praised now criticized, though they did not know why. I was advised to burn my offensive manuscript, and assured that in time I might live down the shame I had brought on myself. Yet these same friends had seen these verses in periodicals and praised them. All this but stimulated me to the only vindication I desired, the publication of my book. A Chicago publisher saw his opportunity and offered to bring out the book, and it was an immediate success. It has been issued in London also, where it met with immediate favor. The first proceeds of its sale enabled me to rebuild and improve the old home which was fast going to ruin. Life, which had been a slowly widening stream for me at this period, seemed to unite with the ocean of success and happiness. My engagement, though not announced, occurred the same week my book was issued. 1 year later, in 1884, I was married to one of God's truest noblemen and came east to live. Burdens long borne alone were lifted by strong, willing hands, and dreams long dreamed became realities. But work, which had been a necessity, had grown to be a habit, and still forms a large element of life's pleasures for me. The questions and longings of those summer evenings when I stood in the dying glory of a Wisconsin sunset on the South Hill back of the lonely little home have all been answered. For I am the one who lives to say, my skies have held more gold than gray, and that the glory of the real by far outshines the youth of my ideal. And with that, my beloved friends, I wish you sweet dreams. You too are a messenger of light. And as you sleep, the angels will help amplify the messages of light, the ripples of goodness that you will be bringing into the world too. So you rest well and know that you are loved, and know that you too are a blessing in this world. Sweet dreams.